Welcome to season 2 of Classic Movie Club. I'm your host, Chad Knurk, the digital editor of Film Review. This season, we're bringing you more conversations on all things classic film, and today we're celebrating the lost and orphaned films that once lined the public domain bargain bin, which are now seeing truly stunning restorations from film masters, a consortium of historians and enthusiasts focused on film preservation. Launched in 2023 by industry veteran and film historian Phil Hopkins, Filmmasters is a boutique home video label committed to reviving films that have been sitting dormant for decades. By scanning original elements, in some cases the original camera negative, in 2K and 4K, Filmmasters presents special edition 2-disc collections of cult classics, giving these often beloved yet neglected titles the full treatment with original and archival bonus materials, in-depth documentaries, and audio commentaries on deluxe releases of definitive restorations. Phil, for those who don't know about your background, I would love to hear where your passion for classic film started and then how that passion evolved into a career.
Yeah, it's almost sort of an accidental career because I never thought of myself as actually making a living watching old films. And certainly my obsession with cinema started as a very young kid. I am from a certain generation that grew up having home movies.
Mm.
And back in the late 1960s, early 1970s, I had an uncle who had filmed my family from the 1920s all the way up through the 1970s
Oh, wow.
on a 16 millimeter camera and then processed the film photochemically to bring back to family events to watch on a big screen and sometimes on a white sheet that was hung up. So that was always in the background for me as a little kid. And I was transfixed by the fact that I could watch images of my grandparents and my dad as a little kid. That was sort of the first cinema experience as a little kid that led me to the tactical nature of film and actually threading a projector and being around people to watch their expression and whatnot. So I inherited the family archive when my uncle decided that he no longer wanted to deal with it. And also the fact that by the time I inherited it, most people had already seen these films 1,000 times. And the cute nature of me being a little kid projecting the film as the projectionist was enhanced when I started to discover that you could buy films from collectors and actually swap movies and go to these sort of flea markets with dealers that had 16 millimeter film prints. And I got into film collecting. The way I got into it was because it was the family film archive that I wanted to save and preserve. And then because of the sheer boredom of the family members who had seen the same films, I had to find film to project. And then that got me into this sort of very strange world of film collectors and people that amassed hundreds and thousands of films that they would then take the approach that they were the ones that were going to sort of hoard these movies. And then how do these films get seen, right? If collectors were not going to share them. And that led to me sort of knowing about film. But what really got me into it professionally was I'm also a musician. And years ago, after I had done music full time, I had the opportunity to start a record company. And we were doing a lot of reissues of old music. So I had the interest in music to begin with, but I also had the interest in film, how I would actually use that I didn't know yet. But a friend of mine had made a documentary called Sex, Drugs, and Democracy. At the time, our record label, we were distributed into retail, into stores and whatnot. And he asked me if I could help him distribute his movie. Back maybe 26 years ago when we got the film, DVD had just come out.
Mm.
And he said, maybe you could actually put the film out on DVD. And I took it to the sales team and the people who did the marketing, and they said, this film is it's a good independent film, but we don't know how much interest we're going to get from retailers. And for some reason, I don't know if it was me or, the fact that he knew I had it, but we came up with the idea of including Reefer Madness as a
Oh,
bonus feature and putting that on a DVD with his documentary. And it did really well. And that immediately the light bulb went off, like, oh my God, you've got access to all these 16 millimeter films. Maybe you could actually put more of these movies out into the market and get some of these films that I've been collecting because I was, always looking for film prints, but I never really thought of myself as being a film distributor. So I
mm,
got into home video probably, it's been 25, 26 years now. So that's sort of my journey. And then what led to kind of the current situation is that when I realized that a lot of these films that had fallen into public domain that we've been putting out on home video back 25 years ago, we now have the tools and access to much better means of scanning film and higher resolution. And for 2 decades, we've been sort of dealing with archival film salvage and helping people with film archives and getting films out of private collection. Because one of the things that I was really aware of was a lot of these film hoarders and film collectors passed away. The family members had no idea how to deal with these collections. And more often than not, they would either go to other collectors or they would get thrown away or they would go into kind of a landfill.
oh
And
gosh.
the nature of, kind of film preservation is challenging now too because so many of the institutions don't have space and a room for film, especially nitrate film.
Hmm.
Having access to the film, but also having the ability to store it and to, kind of take care of it has been equally important for what we've been doing over the past few years since launching my new initiative. After kind of thinking I wouldn't be doing this, we had a company that I sold several years ago, and I thought that might be the end of my journey doing physical media. And then a couple of years ago, we were asked to help Turner Classic Movies track down some film elements for a couple of movies. And lo and behold, I'm doing it again. And then we decided to put Blu-rays out in 2023. And this was sort of at another weird pivot was home media has gone through this new renaissance. So all these boutique small companies that are not doing big box retail, but they're finding their lane of in terms of where they want to be with what they're releasing. So we've taken on the role of, finding a lot of the orphan films or films that have come out in crappy resolution,
Mm.
uh, and trying to come out with, kind of definitive versions of these sort of lesser known or usually ignored films that have been relegated to poor quality releases.
What is that process like in figuring out what films you're selecting and taking that through the process to disc?
It's what we have access to in terms of material more often than not. So we also have to look at, with what we're doing with physical media, how much we have available and then how much we can actually release without compromising kind of the quality of what we've put out previously. And that's challenging because I didn't think physical would be around in 2025.
Mm.
And we're being told, especially by the majors, that that's kind of in their rear window right now. We've kind of decided to not be in physical from the studio perspective. And what that means now is that the smaller companies, the boutique home video companies, either have access to studio films to make 4K scans and to put out, and then give back those elements to the studios who probably have less interest in putting them out now. But for us, it really just comes down to what material we're working from. And it's easier for us to say, for horror movies and for B movies, sci-fi films or kind of 50s horror movies, there's a certain audience of monster kids that will buy every monster movie we can put out. And they're very impassioned and passionate about, these releases. But we also know there's a lot of other genres that we'd love to see out there, a lot of pre-code films. We put out the Scarlet Letter, the 1934 Colleen Moore. It was the first sound adaptation of that film to come out, and it was released by what we would refer to as sort of a poverty row studio called Majestic Pictures. But we had access to the original camera negative,
Mm.
and that was incredible to be able to work off of a preservation piece and have something that, again, some of these smaller studios like Majestic, they're not going to get the love. I mean, very few people will sign up to put out a 4K scan and put the restoration work into films of that nature. And thankfully, Turner Classic Movies is still out there and still showing these films, because that's a huge part of exposure for us, certainly for everyone else that loves classic film. Having Turner Classic Movies still out there is critical. And then having a smaller audience putting these out to have them, available is great. And then we identify who's the best sort of source to do a commentary for the particular film that we're working on. And we have a number of different people. We work with Tom Weaver, who's written, numerous books on horror movies and B movies, and he is the ambassador of the Monster Kids right now. And he's done our most recent release, which comes out next month, which is another Roger Corman film. Christ, I think we've done maybe 7 Corman restorations in the past 2 years. And this is Corman's first production. It's Monster from the Ocean Floor, which was never released in high definition. And we licensed it from the rights holder, Kip Parker, who you might know. Kip Parker Films is actually the rights holder to the movie. But we had access to the original camera negative, to this sort of very low budget Corman monster movie. And we decided that, again, this is worth giving a lot of special attention to. So we work with Tom on the commentary. We work with Daniel Griffith's company, Ballyhoo Productions, that does a lot of our special features and featurettes. And we put together almost like a Criterion level version of a movie that you probably would have seen in a bargain bin, for $5 20 years ago. But there's an audience of very passionate monster movie fans that love these movies. And then, of course, we have to decide, do we just do that, or do we try to go into other genres as well? That's why we try to mix up the releases with, I love pre-code, I love film noir, and we try to find a lot of films, that will come out, but also know that we can't put everything out. So we have to sort of decide, which is going to be the next release that's going to get the deluxe treatment. And then it could be 6 or 7 months by the time we actually get it released, because so much goes into the restoration, the production, the liner notes, the commentary to get it ready. And then it's a matter of, moving on to the next one and kind of deciding. But we decide based on elements, and then who's available that can really offer a lot in terms of backstory to contextualize the film and make it a special release.
That's one of the things that I love about Film Masters is you're taking content that we're used to seeing a really crappy version of, but we're seeing them in 2K, 4K releases like they've never been seen before. In some cases, even in their original theatrical run, they didn't look that good. It's a great way for all of us to get to experience a film anew. You mentioned kind of correlating all of the content, and that has been one of the great casualties of streaming, is that we don't get that great behind the scenes content that we used to have on releases. And so I'm so glad that you're continuing that. What is that process like in terms of compiling all of that, getting that content together, and how many works do you typically have sort of in rotation?
Yeah, there's multiple. Right now, we've scanned probably close to 70 or 80 films in the past 2 years.
Wow.
And we're always sort of in the midst of restoration on 3 or 4 films at one time at different stages in the restoration process. So by the time we get a film scanned, there's probably 3 or 4 other films that have been scanned 5 or 6 months earlier that are further along in the food chain of production. So, yeah, we have enough in the arsenal right now to release easily another 50 releases.
Wow.
And then opportunities, come in front of us to either acquire or license additional titles. And that's when, being a boutique company, you kind of say, it's too bad we don't have those resources of a major studio. And it's too bad it's not of an era where you can justify investing a lot of money into it because the return is not what it was 20 years ago in terms of what you can make in physical. But thankfully, there is still enough of an audience to justify, putting it up. But we have to strategically pace it because the manufacturing of what we're doing with our special editions, we include 20-page booklets, and in most cases with our special editions, it's a 2-disc collection. So there's a lot involved in terms of the production and the investment, and then getting it into retail and online. And by the time the distributor gets it out there and we get paid, and then we have to wait for that, there's a cycle. And I think, a lot of boutique home media companies are in the same position that we're in. They're putting out a release as often as they can, but they also have to wait until they're getting paid from the distributor to reinvest that.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, a lot of what we're doing is releasing enough DVDs and Blu-rays to put out, but also to make sure that we're not over-releasing, and then we don't have enough left to pay for the restoration, to pay our contributors. And we also do other things too. We have a blog. Even though we're small, we're not getting, tons and tons of traffic. We feel that it's important to have other areas to engage our audience with. So we have a editorial blog on our Film Masters website. We also have a YouTube channel. Sometimes we'll put up the raw scan so people can see what it looked like before it went through the restoration process. We'll put our trailers up there. We'll put some other things that we have access to that we're probably not going to put out on DVD or Blu-ray, just to have them on our channel. And then we also do different original productions too, that, like to your point earlier, a lot of those engagement tools that do the contextualizing of the film, we think they should be available on streaming, because not everyone's going to buy a physical DVD or Blu-ray. So we've made a lot of our original productions and featurettes available on our YouTube channel. And I think that's important because they should be seen. If there's a documentary about a director or somebody that was involved with the film that we're releasing, and someone is really interested in Roger Corman, we've got a ton of stuff about him. So we're including our commentary tracks and our special features as part of our YouTube channel. And I think, that's something that I wish more companies would do, is make those special features available as streaming assets. Because if you think about it, I mean, there's hundreds of these special features that probably won't get seen. And unless you're like us, right, like a massive geek and have, hundreds of DVDs and Blu-rays in your house, chances are you won't find these on like a streaming site.
Right. And that all helps, like you said, contextualize what you're seeing. So rather than just getting a film on disc, you've got all of that behind the scenes content. You've got a booklet explaining more behind the scenes. But then, like you said, you're also engaging online. So there's multiple ways that you're connecting with your audience. I'd love to hear about Sam Sherman and some of the mentors that have influenced you or inspired your trajectory?
Yeah, and thank you. I mean, thanks for mentioning Sam, because Sam is a mentor and a very dear friend. He's also someone that not many people realize how important and significant he is for saving hundreds of films.
Mm.
Sam is known mostly because of his association with his partner, Al Adamson, and their company, Independent International Pictures, that released a lot of drive-in movies like Satan's Sadist and Dracula versus Frankenstein. But Sam, even going back to, when he was in his early 20s, he started a company called Signature Pictures when he was in college. And it's a funny story how he got into it, because he was fascinated with film history and filmmaking, but when he was in college, he was asked to do a book report on The Scarlet Letter. When he didn't read the book, he panicked and asked his friend if he could loan him a 16 millimeter copy of the film that he had of The Scarlet Letter. And then he realized that, wow, this is kind of an important film. where is the negative and how do I get access to it? And he ended up over time, there was a gentleman by the name of Irving Pizer who was the owner of the Majestic Holdings. And Sam, through his friendship and relationship with Irving Pizer, was the beneficiary of the entire collection of Majestic pictures. So if you think about the Vampire Bat, which is another Majestic Pictures film, the Scarlet Letter, The Sin of Nora Moran, um, these are great movies. These are not throwaway films. They're significant because of they're just very good films. And even though they were released and distributed by a company like Majestic, the production value on all those films is quite good. And Sam has preserved those films mostly with the Library of Congress and UCLA, which means that those films that Sam became the custodian of are now in those institutions. So when we decided to work on all three of them, we had access to great material that Sam had actually saved. And UCLA made preservation prints photochemically of all three of those films. So if Turner wanted to show, which they did, Sin of Nora Moran at a festival, they could go to UCLA and get one of the preservation prints and project a 35 millimeter of those films. And and that's wonderful. So Sam doesn't get enough credit for what he's done over the years with film preservation, but he also is an amazing historian where he knew so many of these people
Mm.
personally. And if you look at what he did years later from when he was working from his sort of budding film distribution company to when he met his partner, he was able to get a lot of actors who were not working into his films. So his relationship with like J. Carroll Nash or John Carradine, that was a result of Sam knowing them personally. He wrote for Screen Thrills magazine back in the 1960s, and he was also very good friends with people like Joe Franklin, who had his own New York-based TV and radio show that had a lot of these actors on from, later in their careers. And Sam was a frequent guest on the Joe Franklin show. And so to have someone like Sam still around and completely have amazing recall of so many of these obscure B movie gems, it's incredibly invaluable for someone like myself who I wasn't around, in the early 1960s to have those stories and be able to tell those. I came around much later, so my reference point is very different. So I talk to Sam pretty much daily, and he's been a great friend and a great mentor. And he's also someone who is incredibly passionate about making sure that a younger generation knows about film, and he's always encouraging us to, go after certain movies that are not currently out there and try to get them restored and preserved into a better resolution. We're going to be working on a few more of Sam's films this year as well.
I'm curious if there's been a release that you've worked on or that's coming up that's meant a lot to you personally.
Yeah, I think that the release that we're just about to put out is is meaningful to me because it's Corman's first production,
Mm.
and I've never in a million years thought we would have access to that film from the original source. So being able to get the original camera negative for Corman's first production and work on that, and then to be able to have Corman footage of Corman talking about it included, and then and Tom Weaver's contribution. It's it's not a giant film in the way of kind of well-known horror movies, but to me it's significant for all those reasons I just mentioned. So but I guess I'm as excited and passionate about every release I'm just about to put to bed so it can come out. And then if you ask me 2 weeks from now, I'll probably be the next one I'm working on.
Yeah. You mentioned earlier you didn't imagine that in 2025 that physical media would be around. What do you think the future now that you're into Film Masters a couple years and have a better sense of the current environment? Where are we headed with physical media?
I don't know. I think that people like myself and yourself who are, film nerds want this to go on for a long time. Like
Forever, right?
right, we would hope
Yeah.
to think that the films from the 1920s and the 1930s will be appreciated long after we've left this earth. I just wonder, and hope that that's sustainable. I get encouraged. I've gone to most of the Turner Classic Movie festivals, and I'm always encouraged when I see a younger demographic in
Mhm.
line with, their parents or grandparents. But I also see that the new reality is films of the 1980s and 90s are now classic to a certain generation. We just hope that that doesn't mean that films from the 1920s or earlier get ignored. And it's just a matter of how do you put the same enthusiasm into something if an audience is potentially dying off. Will that audience exist for these types of films? We know that every generation is going to have their kind of their classic moment from that decade that they grew up in. But will we still have movies, pre-code movies appreciated in 25 years from now? I can only hope so, because the work that we're doing to restore the movies means that they're available in better resolution to be shown and seen. And making all these contextual tools will give people a better point of reference, because at some point, everyone involved with the films will no longer be alive.
Mm.
So it's kind of like some of the things that we did even last year. We look at and say, thank God we have these. Like we had Jonathan Hayes contribute to one of the releases that we put out, and he passed away. And of course,
Mm.
we had Roger Corman pass away, and we're very fortunate that Daniel had a lot of Corman footage that he had access to. And even Cora Sue Collins, who was the little girl in The Scarlet Letter and
Yeah,
also is in the movie Sin of Norma Wren, she's still with us,
right.
and she's amazing. We feel the need to take advantage of everything we possibly can to make sure that if we have an opportunity to interview someone or film someone, we do it while we're able to. But I don't know. Hey, the Beatles are still relevant in 2025, and
That's right.
they still make documentaries about them, and they come up with ways to keep that property going. And I think that having a turn into classic movies is an important part of that. If we lose a TV network that's done so much for the preservation and the promotion of these types of films, that hurts the community tremendously. And then I don't know how you replace that. If all the major bean counters at all these big companies don't see the significance and the importance of it, then we're really in trouble.
Film Masters has the worthy goal of making classic films widely accessible and in the best format possible. They also license their releases and work with preservation institutions to deposit films into locations that will properly preserve and store original masters for posterity. Film elements are highly sensitive, of course, and easily deteriorate over time, especially without proper storage. Another of their goals is to find and save more original prints and halt that process of aging. If you want to learn more or get involved, visit filmmasters.com. That's our show. We hope you enjoyed the journey. If you like what we do, please consider becoming a member of Classic Movie Club. Your support helps us produce a new episode each month and continue the legacy of film review. Don't forget to subscribe, like, review, and share the podcast with all your film friends. My thanks again to Film Masters founder Phil Hopkins. You can find more details about Film Masters and all of their releases in our show notes. We invite you back next month for another adventure, but until then, here's looking at you, kid.